My name is Rebecca, and what should have been a peaceful family retreat turned into the ultimate betrayal when my husband's family abandoned me at a remote mountain cabin with no car, no phone service, and a critical meeting just hours away. They called it a character-building exercise. I called it sabotage. What they didn't expect was the helicopter landing in the clearing the next morning, or how completely their lives would change in the 72 hours that followed. Sometimes the people closest to you don't realize what you're capable of until they've pushed you too far. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The security footage from Pine Ridge Resort shows a woman pacing on a wraparound porch, the magnificent Colorado mountains stretching behind her. She checks her watch repeatedly, the morning sun climbing higher. As realization slowly dawns across her face, that woman was me, Rebecca Morgan, 18 months ago, coming to terms with the fact that my husband's family had orchestrated my abandonment. I remember how the wooden floorboards creaked beneath my feet as I walked the length of that porch. For the 100th time, my breath forming small clouds in the crisp mountain air. This was supposed to be a celebratory weekend. My promotion to COO at Vertex Technologies had been announced just days earlier, and my husband Nathan suggested we spend the weekend at his family's remote cabin before my first major board meeting. On Monday, "You deserve to relax before the craziness starts," he'd said with that smile that had won me over 8 years ago when we met at business school. The Sullivan family owned a beautiful property in the mountains, about 3 hours from Denver, far enough to feel disconnected, close enough to make it back easily. Or so I thought. We had arrived Friday evening, Nathan and me, his parents, Thomas and Elaine Sullivan, his brother Alex and his wife Whitney. The Sullivans were Colorado royalty, 3 generations of wealth built from mining ventures and tech investments. Thomas Sullivan had been on the cover of Forbes twice, and the family name graced half a dozen buildings throughout Denver. They were powerful, connected, and obsessed with maintaining their dynasty. He was the outsider, the scholarship girl from Arizona who had worked her way through college, built a career through relentless determination, and somehow caught the eye of the Sullivan heir. For 8 years I'd tried to earn their respect, to prove I was more than just an ambitious woman who had trapped their son. I endured their subtle criticisms about my background, my career focus, and my decision to keep my maiden name professionally. Tjaktert weekend had actually gone surprisingly well. We hiked on Saturday, prepared meals together, and even shared stories around the fireplace that night. For once, I felt like I might finally be breaking through with them. Thomas had even asked thoughtful questions about my new role at Vertex and the changes I planned to implement. "You've got a good head for business, Rebecca," he'd said, swirling his whiskey. "Not everyone sees the big picture like you do." Sunday morning, I woke early, eager to get back to Denver by afternoon to prepare for Monday's meeting. I had outlined an ambitious new direction for Vertex, and as the new COO, this would be my moment to establish myself with the board. The presentation was saved on my laptop back at our apartment, needing just a few final touches. I made coffee for everyone and waited for the household to stir. When Thomas emerged, he suggested everyone go into town for breakfast. "I know a fantastic little place about 30 minutes from here," he said, his voice carrying that distinctive Sullivan confidence. "Best pancakes in Colorado." Elaine appeared, adding with a smile, "Rebecca, why don't you stay and pack up? We'll bring something back for you." I agreed, partly because I wanted to be helpful, partly because I was anxious to get on the road. So I watched them leave, Thomas and Elaine in their Range Rover, Alex and Whitney in their Tesla, and my husband, Nathan, following in our Audi. "Back in an hour, babe," Nathan called as he pulled away, not quite meeting my eyes. I cleaned, packed, and organized efficiently, skills honed from years of managing complex projects and teams. By 10, everything was ready by the door, and I sat on the porch waiting for their return. By 11, I felt the first stirrings of concern. By noon, with no sign of them and no response to my texts, the cabin's remote location meant spotty cell service at best. Anxiety had blossomed into cold realization. I walked the perimeter of the property, climbed the small rise behind the cabin to try to get cell service. Nothing. No cars in sight, no way to contact anyone. We were miles from the nearest neighbor, and I had no idea which direction to even start walking. That's when I found the note, tucked under a candle on the dining table where I'd somehow missed it during my cleaning. Written in Nathan's handwriting, "Rebecca, consider this your first real test as a Sullivan. My parents believe you need to understand what it means to be part of this family. Use your resourcefulness to find your way back. Don't worry about the meeting." Dad called Marcus at Vertex. "They understand you need personal time." I read it 3 times, disbelief turning to fury. They had deliberately left me stranded, and worse, they had contacted my CEO to undermine my first major appearance as COO. The meeting where I was set to present my vision for the company's future, the culmination of months of work and years of climbing the corporate ladder. The Sullivans had finally revealed exactly what they thought of me. A problem to be eliminated, an outsider who had risen too far, too fast. What they didn't know as I stood there, the note crumpled in my fist, was that I had spent my entire life being underestimated, and I had never, not once, let it stop me. As the full reality of my situation settled over me, I made a critical decision. This wasn't going to be a story about a woman abandoned in the mountains. This would be a story about consequences. The Sullivans had miscalculated badly. In their arrogance, they'd forgotten to ask themselves a fundamental question. Who was Rebecca Morgan before she became connected to the Sullivan name? I grew up in a small Arizona town where nothing came easy. My father left when I was 9, and my mother worked 3 jobs to keep us afloat. By 16, I was managing our household budget, negotiating with bill collectors, and learning that systems, all systems, have vulnerabilities if you're smart enough to spot them. I won a full scholarship to Berkeley, graduated summa cum laude, and landed at one of the top consulting firms in the country. I built a reputation as the person you called when a problem seemed unsolvable. I specialized in corporate restructuring, identifying weaknesses, inefficiencies, and yes, sometimes corruption. Nathan had been dazzled by this when we met in my MBA program. "You see through everything," he'd said admiringly after watching me dismantle a case study that had stumped our entire class. His family, however, had always viewed these same qualities with suspicion. Now, standing in that empty cabin, I realized why. The Sullivans hadn't just married their son to an ambitious outsider. They'd invited a skilled analyst into their inner circle. For 8 years, I'd had access to their conversations, their business dealings, and their creative accounting practices. I'd been quiet, observant, filing away information without fully understanding its value. Until now. I walked back into the cabin and took stock of my assets. I had my phone, useless without service, my wallet, the clothes I was wearing, and the contents of my purse. No car keys, those had left with Nathan. The pantry held enough food for a few days, but that wouldn't help me get to Denver. Then I remembered. Thomas kept an emergency satellite phone in the cabin. "These mountains can be unpredictable," he'd explained once, showing me where it was stored in a lockbox in his office. The lockbox required a code. I tried Thomas's birthday. Nothing. Elaine's, nothing. Their anniversary, still nothing. Then I tried the date Sullivan Mining went public. The number Thomas had once boasted was the day that changed everything for our family. The lockbox clicked open. The satellite phone was older but operational. I powered it on, praying the battery still held a charge. It did. I could have called 911 explaining I was stranded. But that would play right into the Sullivans' narrative. Poor Rebecca, unable to handle herself, needing to be rescued. Instead, I dialed a different number, Mira Phillips. The voice that answered was crisp, professional. Mira, it's Rebecca Morgan. Rebecca. Her tone warmed immediately. I wasn't expecting to hear from you before tomorrow's meeting. Excited to see what you've been working on. Mira was Vertex's head of product development, and one of the few senior executives who hadn't come from Thomas Sullivan's network. We'd bonded as outsiders in a company still heavily influenced by the Sullivan family, despite going public years ago. I'm in a situation, I said, keeping my voice steady. The Sullivans have left me stranded at their mountain cabin. No car, no way to get back for tomorrow's meeting. A pause. They did what? It's a test, I said, the word bitter on my tongue. And apparently, Thomas has already called Marcus to say I need personal time, away from work. Another pause. I could almost hear Mira processing, recalculating. She understood immediately what was happening. A power play to undermine me before I could establish my authority as COO. Where exactly are you? She asked finally. I gave her the coordinates from the satellite phone's GPS. Can you be ready in 3 hours? Ready for what? I have a brother who runs helicopter tours out of Boulder. He owes me a favor. Hope surged through me. You'd do that? Rebecca, Mira said firmly. Your presentation tomorrow could transform Vertex. I've seen what you've been building. If Thomas Sullivan is trying to sabotage that, then he's acting against the company's interests. This isn't just about you anymore. After disconnecting, I turned my attention to what I could control. I opened my laptop. At least I had that with me. And although there was no internet connection, I could still work on my presentation. The Sullivans thought they were teaching me a lesson about dependency. I would teach them one about preparation. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. For the next 3 hours, I refined my slides, practiced my delivery, and mentally mapped out contingencies for every possible scenario at tomorrow's meeting. The Sullivans would have poisoned the well with the board. I needed to be flawless. Outside, the afternoon shadows lengthened across the mountains. I kept checking the sky, straining to hear the distant thump of helicopter blades. What if Mira couldn't reach her brother? What if the weather turned? What if this was just another dead end in a day filled with betrayals? Just as doubt began to creep in, I heard it, the rhythmic chopping sound growing louder. I rushed outside to see a sleek black helicopter descending toward the clearing beside the cabin, kicking up a swirl of pine needles and dust. I grabbed my purse and laptop, locked the cabin behind me, a petty gesture perhaps, but satisfying, and ran toward the helicopter, ducking under the still spinning rotors. The pilot, a man with Mira's same sharp eyes, gave me a quick nod as I climbed. Aboard. Rebecca Morgan? He shouted over the engine noise. Yes. I'm Jake Phillips. Mira says you need to get to Denver. Fast. I do. Thank you for this. He handed me a headset so we could communicate during the flight. No problem. Not often I get to play knight in shining armor via helicopter. As we lifted off, I looked down at the Sullivan cabin growing smaller beneath us. From this height, it looked like a child's toy house, small, insignificant, just like their attempt to diminish me. My sister said something about family troubles? Jake asked once we were cruising. My husband's family thinks they're teaching me a lesson in humility, I replied, watching the spectacular mountain landscape unfold below us. And what lesson are they getting in return? He asked with a knowing smile. I thought about Thomas Sullivan's face when he realized I'd not only escaped his trap, but would be arriving at tomorrow's meeting in spectacular fashion. I thought about the information I'd gathered over 8 years, the conversations overheard, the documents glimpsed, the patterns recognized. They're about to learn that some games have unexpected consequences, I said, feeling a calm certainty settle over me. and that abandoning the wrong person can be a very expensive mistake. Jake laughed. I like you already. Mira said you were formidable. The helicopter banked toward Denver, the city's skyline appearing on the horizon. In less than an hour, I would be home. Enough time to shower, change, and finalize my preparations for tomorrow. The Sullivans thought they were writing my story, the outsider who finally understood her place. They didn't realize I had taken control of the narrative. Whatever happened next would be entirely my decision, and I had already decided this would not end well for them. The helicopter touched down on the rooftop landing pad of Vertex Technologies, gleaming downtown Denver headquarters at 7:15 Monday morning. Jake Phillips gave me a thumbs up as I disembarked, the morning sun glinting off the glass and steel of the skyscraper. Good luck in there, he called over the whirring rotors. Mira says you're going to shake things up. I smiled and waved, then straightened my shoulders and walked toward the roof access door. After landing at a small airfield last night, I'd gone straight to my apartment, grateful that I kept an emergency key with my neighbor. Nathan hadn't returned home. No calls, no texts. The Sullivans were fully committed to their lesson. I had showered, laid out my most powerful suit, a charcoal gray Armani with subtle red pinstripes, and reviewed my presentation one final time before falling into a surprisingly deep sleep. The clarity that comes from betrayal is remarkably focused. Now, as I took the elevator down to the executive floor, I felt a strange calm. I'd spent the night thinking about not just surviving this meeting, but using it to permanently alter the power dynamic between myself and the Sullivan family. The elevator doors opened to reveal Mira waiting for me, 2 coffee cups in hand. I figured you could use this, she said, handing me one. Extra shot, just how you like it. You're a lifesaver, literally. I took a grateful sip. How are you holding up? Her eyes were concerned beneath her professionally straight black bob. Better than anyone expects me to be, I replied with a small smile. She nodded, understanding immediately. The board's already gathering. Marcus seemed surprised when I mentioned you'd be here. Marcus Reynolds was our CEO, handpicked by Thomas Sullivan years ago and firmly in the family's pocket. I bet he was. I took another sip of coffee. Who else is here early? Everyone, Mira said significantly, including Thomas Sullivan. Of course he was. Thomas held no official position at Vertex anymore. He'd officially retired to the board 5 years ago. But his influence permeated the company. He wouldn't miss the opportunity to watch his plan unfold, to see the new. COO failed to appear for her first major presentation. Good, I said, feeling that calm certainty again. I was hoping he'd be here. Mira gave me a searching look. Rebecca, what are you planning? Beyond the presentation, I mean. I considered how much to share. Mira was an ally, but what I was about to do would send shockwaves through the entire company. Better that she have plausible deniability. Let's just say I'm done trying to fit into a family that was never going to accept me, I said carefully. And I'm ready to show them exactly who they've been underestimating. She nodded slowly. Whatever you're about to do, know that you've got people in your corner. Not everyone at Vertex is a Sullivan puppet. We walked together to the boardroom, a massive space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Rocky Mountains. Inside, 12 people were already seated around the polished mahogany table, with Marcus Reynolds at the head. Thomas Sullivan sat at his right hand, looking impeccable in a tailored navy suit, silver hair perfectly styled. His eyes widened almost, imperceptibly when I walked in, the only indication that my appearance had disrupted his carefully laid plans. Rebecca, Marcus said, recovering quickly. This is a surprise. Thomas mentioned you were taking some personal time. I smiled, setting my laptop down and connecting it to the presentation system. There must have been a misunderstanding. I wouldn't miss this meeting for anything. I could feel Thomas's eyes boring into me as I prepared, could sense his mind, racing to adjust his strategy. Nathan was nowhere to be seen, probably still at the family estate, waiting for news of my humiliation. "Well," Marcus said with forced joviality, "we're certainly glad you could make it. We're all eager to hear your thoughts on Vertex's future direction." As the remaining executives filed in, I received curious glances and a few warm smiles. My helicopter arrival had apparently already become gossip around the office. I stood at the front of the room, surveying the faces before me, the 12 people who controlled Vertex's destiny, and by extension my career. Some were longtime Sullivan allies, some were newer additions brought in for their expertise. All were watching me with varying degrees of curiosity, skepticism, or encouragement. "Thank you all for being here today," I began, my voice steady and confident. "As Vertex's new Chief Operating Officer, I've spent the past 3 months conducting a comprehensive analysis of our organizational structure, market position, and financial outlook." I clicked to my first slide, a graph showing Vertex's declining market share over the past 5 years, precisely since Thomas had stepped back and installed Marcus. What I've found is concerning. While our competitors have been innovating and expanding, Vertex has been stagnating. Our product development cycle has slowed, our acquisition strategy has grown conservative, and our corporate culture has calcified. Thomas shifted in his seat, his expression darkening. This wasn't the safe, incremental plan he'd expected, the kind of presentation a Sullivan in-law would give, careful not to rock the boat. I moved through my slides methodically, laying out a vision for Vertex that was bold, ambitious, and notably different from the path Thomas and Marcus had been following. With each point, I could see the room dividing, the old guard growing increasingly uncomfortable, the newer executives leaning forward with interest. Marcus interrupted halfway through. "These are certainly provocative ideas, Rebecca, but I'm concerned about the disruption such dramatic changes would cause. Vertex has a long history of stable growth. Vertex has a long history of innovation that has been abandoned in favor of protecting legacy investments," I corrected firmly. "And the numbers support my assessment." I clicked to a new slide, one that wasn't in the deck I'd prepared earlier. This one showed a detailed breakdown of Vertex's executive compensation structure compared to company performance. While our market share has declined 18% over 5 years, executive compensation has increased 34%. Most notably, I highlighted a specific line that showed Marcus's compensation package, which had more than doubled despite consistently missed targets. Thomas leaned forward, his knuckles white against the dark wood of the table. "I don't see how executive compensation is relevant to your operational assessment, Rebecca." I met his gaze directly. "It's relevant because it demonstrates a fundamental misalignment of incentives. Our leadership is rewarded regardless of performance, which explains much of the complacency I've observed." The room had gone very quiet. I hadn't just challenged the company's direction, I'd directly challenged its leadership structure, the very system Thomas Sullivan had put in place to maintain control even after his official retirement. What happened in that boardroom over the next 2 hours would reshape Vertex Technologies forever. It would also set in motion a chain of events that the Sullivan family never saw coming. Events that would ultimately cost them far more than they could have imagined when they left me alone in that mountain cabin. By the time I clicked to my final slide, I knew I had won over at least half the board. I also knew that Thomas Sullivan would never forgive me for what I had just done. The battle lines were drawn. What none of them realized yet was that this presentation was just my opening move. The boardroom cleared slowly after the presentation, executives lingering to speak with me privately, their expressions a mix of impressed and concerned. I had just upended the status quo at Vertex Technologies, and everyone knew it. Thomas Sullivan was the last to leave, pausing at the door to deliver his parting shot. "Impressive performance," he said, his voice low enough that only I could hear. Nathan was right about your determination. But you've miscalculated badly if you think this display changes anything. I maintained eye contact, refusing to be intimidated. I don't think it changes anything, Thomas. I know it does. His jaw tightened, but he left without another word, pulling out his phone as he strode down the corridor. No doubt calling Nathan, organizing their counterattack. Mira approached once he was gone, eyes wide with admiration and concern. That was spectacular, and possibly career suicide. Only if they win, I replied, gathering my materials. And if they don't? I smiled. Then Vertex gets the leadership it deserves, and I get to run the company I believe in without Sullivan interference. Mira shook her head. You know they won't let this stand. Thomas built this company. His name might not be on the door anymore, but his fingerprints are all over everything here. I'm counting on it, I said cryptically. My phone buzzed. Nathan? Finally. I ignored it, sliding the phone back into my pocket. He'd made his choice yesterday, standing with his family as they abandoned me. Whatever he wanted to say now wasn't worth hearing. By noon, the narrative of what had happened in the boardroom was spreading throughout Vertex. My inbox filled with messages, support from younger employees excited by the vision I'd presented, thinly veiled warnings from Sullivan loyalists concerned about my reckless approach. Marcus Reynolds scheduled a private meeting with me for 4 p.m. I knew what was coming, either a dressing down for overstepping or, more likely, an attempt to bring me back into line with the Sullivan vision. I spent the intervening hours in my new office, executing the next phase of my plan. For years, I'd had access to the Sullivan family's business discussions, casual comments over dinner, documents left in plain sight, patterns I couldn't help but notice. I had initially dismissed much of it as aggressive but legal business strategy. Now, I reviewed it all through a different lens. The Sullivan mining interests, the tech investments, the complex web of subsidiaries and holding companies. All of it constructed with precision, all of it vulnerable if you knew where to look. At 3:45, my office door opened without a knock. Nathan stood there, his face a storm of emotions. Anger, confusion, a hint of fear. "What the hell are you doing?" he demanded, closing the door behind him. I leaned back in my chair, studying him. The man I'd married, the man I'd loved, suddenly looked like a stranger in his perfectly tailored suit and Sullivan family watch. How had I never seen it before? The entitlement in his bearing, the absolute certainty that the world would bend to his will. "My job," I replied calmly. "The one your father tried to undermine by having me stranded in the mountains. It was a test, Rebecca, a family tradition. Everyone goes through it. Being abandoned without transportation or reliable communication isn't a tradition, Nathan. It's abuse wrapped in privilege." He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "You're overreacting. Dad called Marcus, explained you needed time. We are coming back for you tomorrow." "Tomorrow?" I laughed incredulously. "After my first major presentation as COO? How convenient." "This is exactly why we did it," he exploded. "This persecution complex, this need to prove yourself at all costs. The Sullivans look out for each other. We put family first." "Except when that family includes me," I said quietly. His expression softened slightly, taking my quieter tone as a sign of weakening. Nathan had always been skilled at emotional manipulation, a talent inherited from his parents. "Becca," he said, using the nickname I once loved, "you don't understand how things work in families like ours. There are traditions, expectations. Dad was actually impressed with how you handled that mining conglomerate restructuring last year. This was his way of seeing if you had what it takes to be a true Sullivan. By sabotaging my career? By testing your resilience." Nathan moved closer, sitting on the edge of my desk. "Look, what happened in the boardroom today? Dad's upset, but he respects boldness. We can smooth this over. Come home tonight. Let's talk this through as a family. For a moment, I saw the Nathan I fell in love with, charismatic, persuasive, seemingly sincere. But the illusion shattered when I noticed him glance at my computer screen, trying to see what I was working on. Still the loyal Sullivan soldier, gathering intelligence. "Won't be coming home tonight," I said, closing my laptop. "Or any night." He blinked, genuinely surprised. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that yesterday when you drove away from that cabin, you made a choice. You choose your family's toxic traditions over your wife. And now I'm making my choice. Because of one bad weekend? You're willing to throw away 8 years of marriage?" I shook my head. "This isn't about the weekend, Nathan. It's about realizing that I've spent 8 years trying to earn a place in a family that was never going to accept me. Yesterday just made it impossible to ignore any longer." His face hardened. "So what now? You think you can take on the Sullivan family and win?" That presentation was impressive, but Dad already has the board members calling him, looking for reassurance. By tomorrow, this little rebellion will be contained. I checked my watch. "I have a meeting with Marcus in 5 minutes. I suggest you use that time to call your father and tell him to check his secure email, the one he uses for family business. Only." Nathan's expression flickered with uncertainty. "What have you done?" "Nothing yet," I said truthfully. "But in about 20 minutes, Thomas Sullivan is going to understand exactly who he left alone with his family secrets for 8 years. As Nathan left, I gathered my materials for the meeting with Marcus. The next hour would determine whether I still had a job at Vertex. But regardless of that outcome, the wheels I had set in motion would continue turning. Marcus was waiting in his office, standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the mountains, the same mountains where the Sullivan cabin stood. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. "Rebecca," he greeted me, gesturing to a chair. "That was quite a presentation this morning." "Thank you," I said, sitting down. "I'm passionate about Vertex's potential." "Passion is valuable," he acknowledged, taking his seat across from me. "But so is alignment with company values and direction." "Here it comes," I thought. "I've received concerned calls from several board members," Marcus continued. "They feel your proposal represents too sharp a departure from our established strategy. The strategy that's lost us 18% market share? The one that's seen 3 of our most innovative project leaders leave for competitors?" Marcus sighed. "Business. Cycles fluctuate. The Sullivan approach has always been to take the long view, to weather temporary setbacks for greater stability. That would be more convincing if executive compensation followed the same philosophy," I countered. "Instead, leadership rewards itself regardless of performance." His expression tightened. "Rebecca, let me be direct. Thomas Sullivan built this company. His vision and values are its foundation. If you can't align yourself with that reality, perhaps Vertex isn't the right place for you." And there it was, the threat, delivered with professional courtesy. "You're right about one thing," I said, meeting his gaze steadily. "Vertex was built on Thomas Sullivan's vision. But are you familiar with every aspect of that vision? Every decision that helped create this company?" Marcus frowned, confused by my shift in direction. "Because I am," I continued. "And I suspect the SEC, the EPA, and several other regulatory bodies would find those decisions enlightening." Before Marcus could respond, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then paled visibly. "I need to take this," he said, suddenly distracted. I nodded and stood. "Take your time. I believe Thomas might need to speak with you urgently as well." As I walked out of Marcus's office, I knew the preliminary documents I'd emailed to Thomas's secure account were having exactly the impact I'd intended. It was just a sample, enough to demonstrate what I knew, not enough to cause irreparable damage yet. The real confrontation was still to come. I returned to my office to find it already occupied. Elaine Sullivan sat primly on my visitor's chair, her Chanel suit immaculate, her coiffed blonde hair not a strand out of place despite the obvious tension in her posture. The Sullivan family matriarch rarely made appearances at Vertex anymore, preferring to focus on her charitable foundation and social obligations. "Rebecca," she greeted me with a tight smile. "I thought we might have a chat, woman to woman." I closed the door and took my seat behind the desk, establishing the power dynamic immediately. "Elaine, this is unexpected." "These are unexpected circumstances." She adjusted her diamond bracelet, a nervous habit I'd observed over the years. "Thomas received some concerning correspondence from you this afternoon." "Did he share it with you?" I asked, curious about how the family was handling this internally. "Not the details," she admitted, "but enough for me to understand that you're upset about the cabin exercise and are lashing out in ways you might regret." I almost laughed at her characterization. Upset, lashing out, as if this were a childish tantrum rather than a calculated response to years of manipulation. "I'm not upset, Elaine. I'm simply finished pretending." Her perfectly maintained facade cracked slightly. "Pretending what, exactly?" "Pretending that I could ever be good enough for your family. Pretending not to notice the Sullivan business, practices that cross ethical and legal lines. Pretending that my marriage to Nathan is more important than my self-respect." Elaine leaned forward, dropping her voice as if we were conspirators rather than adversaries. "Every family has its complexities, Rebecca. The Sullivans have built something extraordinary over generations. Sometimes that requires flexibility in how certain matters are handled." "Flexibility," I repeated. "Is that what we're calling environmental violations in the Wyoming mining operations? Or the systematic tax evasion through the Caribbean shell companies? Or perhaps the board manipulation at Vertex through undisclosed related party transactions?" Her face remained composed, but her knuckles whitened around her designer handbag. "You've been busy." "For 8 years," I confirmed. "Not intentionally at first, but your family has a habit of discussing sensitive matters openly, assuming everyone at the table is a loyal Sullivan. And you're not." "It wasn't a question. I tried to be," I said honestly. "I wanted to be part of the family Nathan loved so much. But yesterday made it clear that was never going to happen." Elaine sighed, switching tactics. "We all make mistakes. Rebecca, Thomas perhaps took this tradition too far. He's from a different generation and believes in these tests of character. But that doesn't mean we can't move forward as a family." "You're here to offer a truce," I realized. "I'm here to prevent unnecessary damage," she corrected. "To the company, to our family name, to your relationship with Nathan. And if I agree to this truce, what are your terms?" Elaine relaxed slightly, sensing a negotiation opening. "You withdraw the more aggressive elements of your presentation. Work with Marcus on a compromise vision for Vertex. Most importantly, you destroy whatever documentation you've compiled. And agree never to speak of Sullivan family matters outside the family. And in return, you remain as COO. You receive our full support within the company. And," she added, reaching into her handbag, "we formalize your position in the family with this." She placed a small velvet box on my desk. I opened it to find a signet ring bearing the Sullivan family crest, identical to the ones Thomas, Nathan, and Alex wore. "Only blood Sullivan family members or spouses receive these," Elaine explained, pride evident in her voice. "Thomas had this made for you months ago and was waiting for the right moment. Consider this his acknowledgement that you've passed the test." I closed the box and slid it back across the desk. "No." Her practiced smile faltered. "Excuse me?" "Your family abandoned me in the mountains, tried to sabotage my career, and now you're attempting to bribe me with a ring?" "No." "This isn't a bribe," she said, offended. "It's a peace offering, a symbol of acceptance." "It's too late for that, Elaine. I don't want to be accepted into a family that tests loyalty through cruelty." Her expression hardened. Then what do you want? I leaned back in my chair, feeling oddly calm despite the magnitude of this confrontation. I want exactly what I outlined in my presentation. A Vertex Technologies free from Sullivan family interference, operating ethically and innovatively. Impossible, she scoffed. Thomas would never allow it. Thomas may not have a choice, I said quietly. Not if he wants to keep the authorities out of the Sullivan family business. Elaine stood abruptly. You're making a terrible mistake. Nobody takes on our family and wins. And yet here we are. She collected her handbag and the rejected ring box. At the door, she paused for a final warning. Thomas already has calls in to half the board members. By morning, you'll be lucky if you still have a job, let alone the influence to push through any of your so-called reforms. After she left, I sat alone in my office as evening shadows lengthened across Denver. The Sullivan counteroffensive was clearly underway. Elaine's visit followed by Thomas's calls to board members. Next would come pressure from Nathan, probably an emotional appeal to our history together. My phone had been buzzing continuously with his messages, which I continued to ignore. Whatever he had to say, I wasn't interested in hearing it until the Sullivans understood that their usual tactics wouldn't work this time. Around 7 p.m., Mira knocked on my door, takeout bags in hand. Figured you might not want to brave the company cafeteria right now, she said, setting the food on my desk. The rumors are flying. What kind of rumors? I asked, suddenly realizing I was starving. That you and Thomas Sullivan had a massive blowout. That you're threatening to expose company secrets. Marcus is calling an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning. She unwrapped a sandwich and handed it to me. Is any of that true? I took a grateful bite before answering. Some of it. The emergency board meeting part, definitely. Rebecca, Mira said hesitantly, whatever you're doing, is it worth risking everything you've built here? The concern in her voice touched me. In a company dominated by Sullivan allies, Mira had been one of my few genuine supporters. What? Would you say if I told you that some of Vertex's past successes came at the expense of environmental regulations? Or that certain financial reporting has been creative at best? Fraudulent at worst? Mira's expression grew serious. I'd say I've suspected something like that for years but never had proof. I have proof, I said simply. And after what happened? This weekend, I can't pretend not to have it anymore. She nodded slowly. So the emergency board meeting will either end with significant changes to Vertex's leadership and practices, or with my termination, I confirmed. Either way, by this time tomorrow, the company will never be the same. And neither will your marriage, Mira observed gently. I felt a pang at that. Despite everything, despite his role in the cabin incident, part of me still loved Nathan. Or perhaps I loved who I thought he was, before the Sullivan family loyalty revealed itself so starkly. That may already be beyond saving, I admitted. As night fell over Denver, I finalized my preparations for the morning's confrontation. The documents were organized, my presentation prepared, contingency plans in place. I had spent the day making strategic calls to allies on the board, regulatory contacts from my consulting days, even 2 journalists I trusted to handle the story responsibly if it came to that. By 10 p.m., I was the only one left on the executive floor, the office quiet except for the gentle hum of the climate control system. I stood at the window, looking, out at the city lights and the dark silhouette of the mountains beyond. Somewhere out there was the Sullivan cabin where, just 36 hours ago, I had realized the true nature of the family I had married into. Tomorrow would determine whether I had the strength to stand against them when they brought their full influence to bear. The Sullivans weren't accustomed to losing, not in business, not in their social sphere, and certainly not to an outsider they had welcomed into their midst. But then, they had never faced someone who had nothing left to lose. They had taken my trust, undermined my career, and destroyed my marriage. All that remained was my integrity and my determination to ensure that their actions finally had consequences. My phone lit up with another call from Nathan. This time, I answered. "We need to talk," he said, his voice strained. "Yes," I agreed. "We do. Tomorrow, after the board meeting." "This doesn't have to go to the board," he pleaded. "We can resolve this as a family." "That's the thing, Nathan," I said, watching my reflection in the darkened window. "I'm not part of your family. I never really was." Dawn broke over Denver with a spectacular array of oranges and pinks illuminating the mountain peaks. I had spent the night in my office, dozing occasionally on the leather sofa, but mostly preparing for what was to come. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for 8 a.m., an unusually early hour that Thomas had likely chosen to throw me off balance. I showered in the executive gym, changed into the spare outfit I kept at the office, and made my way to the boardroom, 30 minutes early. To my surprise, I wasn't the first to arrive. Diane Levinson, one of our independent board members and the former CEO of a major software company, was already seated, reviewing documents. "Rebecca," she greeted me with a nod. "I thought you might come early." Diane had always been fair but reserved in our previous interactions. As one of the few board members without ties to the Sullivan family, her opinion carried significant weight with the other independents. "I wanted to be prepared," I replied, setting up my materials. "Are you?" she asked, her gaze direct. "Thomas, Sullivan has been calling board members since yesterday afternoon. He's quite persuasive." "I'm aware," I said, continuing my preparations calmly. "But I believe facts will ultimately be more persuasive than Thomas's influence." Diane studied me thoughtfully. "You know, when Marcus announced your promotion to COO, some of us wondered if you were just another Sullivan appointment. Smart and capable, certainly, but ultimately loyal to the family interests above the company's. And now? Now I'm very interested to see what you have to present this morning." She tapped her folder. "Especially after reviewing these material risk disclosures that never quite made it to the full board." My pulse quickened. "You've been doing your own research," she smiled slightly. "I didn't build my own company without learning to verify information independently. Let's just say your presentation yesterday prompted some deeper inquiries on my part." Before I could respond, other board members began filing in. The atmosphere was tense, conversations muted. I noted who spoke with whom, who avoided eye contact with me, who offered encouraging smiles. The battle lines were becoming clear. Thomas and Marcus arrived together 5 minutes before the scheduled start, followed by Nathan and the Sullivan. Family attorney Howard Breslin, a concerning addition that suggested they were anticipating legal complications. Nathan tried to catch my eye, but I focused on my preparations. His presence here was another Sullivan tactic, using our personal relationship to undermine my professional stand. At precisely 8 a.m., Marcus called the meeting to order. "We're convened this morning to address concerns raised by yesterday's presentation from our COO, Rebecca Morgan, and to realign Vertex's strategic direction." The careful wording wasn't lost on me. Not to evaluate my proposals, but to realign. The decision had already been made. Marcus continued. "Before we begin, Thomas Sullivan has asked to address the board given his historical perspective on Vertex's mission and values." And there it was. The Sullivan patriarch would lead the charge against me, leveraging his founder status to overwhelm my executive authority. Thomas stood buttoning his suit jacket with practiced ease. "Thank you, Marcus. Ladies and gentlemen of the board, I won't take much of your time this morning. Vertex Technologies has been my life's work, built on principles of innovation, growth, and family. Those values have guided this company through market fluctuations, technological revolutions, and economic downturns." He paced slowly at the head of the table, the consummate performer. "Yesterday we heard proposals that would fundamentally alter Vertex's direction and governance. While innovation is always welcome, changes of this magnitude require careful consideration of their full implications. Thomas fixed me with a pointed look, particularly when those proposals come alongside thinly veiled threats and mischaracterizations of past business decisions. A murmur ran through the room. Thomas had just acknowledged receiving my documentation without specifying what it contained. Clever, establishing the narrative of unfounded accusations without giving them substance. I believe, Thomas continued smoothly, that we need to reaffirm our commitment to Vertex's established vision and leadership structure. To that end, I move that we table Ms. Morgan's proposals indefinitely and conduct a thorough review of our executive alignment. Translation: reject my ideas and begin the process of removing me. Marcus nodded solemnly. Thank you, Thomas. Does anyone second the motion? Gregory Walsh, a longtime Sullivan ally, raised his hand immediately. Second. Marcus looked around. The table. The motion has been made and seconded. Before we vote, does anyone wish to speak on this matter? This was my moment. I stood, feeling the weight of every gaze in the room. Yes, I'd like to address the board. Marcus couldn't reasonably refuse, though his tight smile suggested he wanted to. The floor is yours, Rebecca. I moved to the presentation screen, but didn't immediately activate it. Instead, I surveyed the faces around the table, 15 men and women who held the future of Vertex in their hands. Yesterday, I presented a vision for Vertex's future based on market realities, competitive analysis, and corporate best practices. That presentation stands on its merits, and I won't repeat it now. I paused, making eye contact with several board members. Instead, I want to address the elephant in the room: the Sullivan family's outsized influence on this company and the issues that have resulted from it. Thomas started to interject, but Diane Levinson raised her hand. I'd like to hear Ms. Morgan out without interruption, please. Thomas subsided, his expression darkening. For years, I continued, Vertex has operated with two parallel governance structures, the official board and executive team, and the unofficial Sullivan family oversight. This has led to decisions that prioritize family interests over shareholder value, corporate ethics, and sometimes even legal compliance. I activated the screen, which displayed a detailed timeline of Vertex decisions over the past decade, color-coded to highlight concerning patterns. The red items represent decisions where Sullivan family interests directly conflicted with Vertex's best interests. The yellow items indicate potential regulatory compliance issues. The green items show instances where independent leadership successfully implemented initiatives despite Sullivan opposition, all of which outperformed company averages. The board leaned forward collectively, studying the visualization. It told a compelling story of systematic interference and questionable decision-making. I have detailed documentation supporting each of these items, I continued. I've also prepared a comprehensive report analyzing the financial impact of these decisions, which estimates that Sullivan family influence has cost Vertex approximately $1.8 billion in unrealized value over the past 5 years. The number hung in the air like a thunderclap. Even Thomas looked momentarily stunned by the precision and scale of my assessment. This isn't personal, I said, though everyone knew that wasn't entirely true. This is about corporate governance, fiduciary duty, and Vertex's future. The proposals I presented yesterday aren't radical. They're necessary corrections to years of misalignment between leadership incentives and company success. I looked directly at Thomas. You built something remarkable, Mr. Sullivan. No one disputes that. But it's time for Vertex to evolve beyond family control and operate as the public company it claims to be. Nathan shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Howard Breslin was furiously writing notes. Marcus looked like he'd swallowed something sour. I move, I said firmly, that we vote on each element of my proposal individually, after a full review of the supporting documentation I've prepared. I also move that we establish an independent committee to investigate the conflicts of interest and compliance concerns highlighted in my report. The room was silent as the implications of my countermotion settled over the board. I had just escalated a governance disagreement to potential regulatory issues that board members could be personally liable for ignoring once formally presented. Diane Levinson broke the silence. I second the motion, and with that, the battle for Vertex's future began in earnest. The boardroom erupted into tense discussion. Thomas Sullivan's face had transitioned from confident to concerned as he huddled with Howard Breslin, their whispered conversation growing increasingly urgent. Marcus attempted to regain control of the meeting, but the independent board members were now actively engaged, asking pointed questions about the documentation I'd referenced. I believe we need to review Ms. Morgan's materials before proceeding. With any vote, said James Chen, normally a quiet presence on the board. If these allegations have substance, our fiduciary duty requires proper investigation. Howard Breslin finally spoke up. The board should be cautious about entertaining unsubstantiated claims that appear to be motivated by personal grievances. Ms. Morgan has recently experienced tensions with the Sullivan family that may color her perspective. Diane Levinson raised an eyebrow. Are you suggesting that personal disagreements invalidate financial data and compliance concerns? Because that's not how board responsibility works, Howard. I'm suggesting, Breslin replied stiffly, that context matters when evaluating accusations of this magnitude. Then let's establish that context, I said, seizing the opening. I hadn't planned to bring up the cabin incident in this forum, but Breslin had opened the door. 2 days ago, the Sullivan family deliberately left me stranded at their remote mountain cabin with no transportation, limited communication, and a critical board meeting scheduled. This meeting, where I was expected to present as COO, the room fell silent, board members exchanging glances of confusion or concern. This was characterized to me as a family tradition, I continued, a test of my resourcefulness and loyalty to the Sullivan family. I was expected to miss this meeting, undermining my professional standing at a critical juncture. Nathan finally spoke up, his voice tight. It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that, I interrupted, meeting his gaze directly. Your father even called Marcus to ensure my absence would be excused, without my knowledge or consent. All eyes turned to Marcus, who shifted uncomfortably. Thomas did mention that Rebecca was taking some personal time at the family retreat. I had no reason to question. You had every reason to question, Diane interjected. Our new COO suddenly missed her first major board presentation? That didn't strike you as unusual? Marcus had no good answer, and his silence was damning. Thomas Sullivan finally stood. His composure recovered. This meeting has devolved into personal grievances rather than corporate governance. Whatever family misunderstanding occurred over the weekend is irrelevant to Vertex's strategic direction. It's entirely relevant, I countered, because it demonstrates the pattern of Sullivan family interference in corporate matters. You deliberately attempted to sabotage a key executive because she wasn't sufficiently loyal to family interests. That's exactly the problem I'm highlighting in my report. I think, said Eleanor Hayes, another independent director, we need to take a step back and establish a process here. We have competing motions on the floor and serious allegations that require proper review. She was right, and I recognized a potential ally. Eleanor had built her career in regulatory compliance before joining several prestigious boards, exactly the type of director who would take governance issues seriously. I propose, Eleanor continued, that we establish a special committee, comprising independent directors to review Ms. Morgan's documentation and report back to the full board within 1 week. Until then, no action should be taken regarding either strategic direction or executive changes. The suggestion was perfectly reasonable, and exactly what Thomas Sullivan didn't want. A special committee of independents would be outside his influence and bound by strict governance requirements. Thomas intervened quickly. While I appreciate the suggestion, Vertex faces immediate competitive challenges that require decisive action. Delaying strategic decisions for a week could have significant market implications. More significant than potential regulatory violations? Eleanor asked pointedly. The tension in the room was palpable. Board members were visibly uncomfortable, caught between Sullivan family loyalty and their legal obligations as directors. Howard Breslin was furiously taking notes, likely documenting the growing liability concerns for his client. Diane Levinson broke the impasse. I move that we adopt Director Hayes's proposal for a special committee, with the additional provision that Ms. Morgan's documentation be placed in escrow with our corporate counsel immediately to ensure its preservation. The implication was clear. Why? She was concerned the Sullivans might attempt to suppress evidence. Second, said James Chen immediately. Marcus, recognizing he was losing control of the meeting, reluctantly called for a vote. All in favor of establishing a special committee to review the concerns raised by Ms. Morgan, with documents to be escrowed with corporate counsel? Hands went up around the table. All of the independent directors and even 2 Sullivan allies, who clearly recognized the legal jeopardy of voting against proper investigation of compliance issues. Motion carries, Marcus announced, unable to hide his displeasure. We'll establish the committee immediately after this meeting. Now, regarding the originally scheduled vote on the company's strategic direction, that should be tabled pending the committee's findings, Diane interjected firmly. We can't reasonably vote on a path forward until we understand these governance concerns. Another vote. Another defeat for the Sullivan contingent. The mood in the room had shifted dramatically from the confident Sullivan-led meeting they had planned to a serious examination of governance failures. As the meeting concluded, Thomas Sullivan approached me, his expression carefully controlled despite the fury evident in his eyes. Impressive maneuvering, he said quietly. But you've made a critical mistake today, Rebecca. This company is my legacy. Do you really think I'll allow you to dismantle it? I met his gaze steadily. This isn't about dismantling your legacy, Thomas. It's about making Vertex the company it should be. Innovative, ethical, and governed for the benefit of all shareholders, not just the Sullivan family. You have no idea what you've started, he warned. Actually, I do. That's the difference between us. You thought you were testing my resourcefulness at that cabin, but you were really giving me the final piece of evidence I needed. Proof that Sullivan family interests will always override proper corporate governance. Nathan appeared at his father's side, his expression a mix of anger and confusion. Becca, can we talk privately? After the special committee completes its work, I replied. Right now, anything we discuss could be seen as an attempt to influence the investigation. This isn't just about business, he insisted. It's about us. Our marriage. The pain in his voice nearly reached me, but I remembered his face as he drove away from the cabin, leaving me stranded without a backward glance. You're right, it isn't just about business, I agreed. But I can't separate what happened personally from what's happening professionally anymore. You made sure of that when you chose family loyalty over basic decency. As I walked away, I could feel the weight of what I'd set in motion. The special committee would have my documentation by the end of the day. Detailed records of questionable Sullivan family decisions spanning years. The comfortable power structure that Thomas had maintained was cracking, and once the full picture emerged, it might collapse entirely. Outside the boardroom, Mira was waiting anxiously. Well, are you still employed? For now, I confirmed. And the board has established a special committee to investigate Sullivan family influence on company decisions. Her eyes widened. You actually did it. You took on Thomas Sullivan and survived. The first round. I nodded, the adrenaline of the confrontation beginning to fade, leaving me exhausted. The first round. There will be more. What happens now? She asked as we walked toward my office. Now, I said, we wait for the Sullivan counterattack, because it's coming and it won't be limited to the boardroom anymore. The Sullivan counterattack began within hours. By afternoon, rumors were circulating throughout Vertex that I was orchestrating a hostile takeover, that I had personal vendettas against the founding family, that I was working with activist investors to dismantle the company. The Sullivan PR machine was operating at full capacity. I remained in my office, working with Vertex's corporate counsel to transfer my documentation to secure escrow. The general counsel, Patricia Winters, maintained a professional demeanor, but I could sense her discomfort. She had been hired by Thomas Sullivan 15 years earlier and had navigated the complex waters of Sullivan family influence throughout her tenure. "This is extensive," she remarked, reviewing the index of materials I had prepared. "How long have you been compiling this information?" "I didn't set out to compile it," I explained. "But over 8 years of marriage to Nathan, I observed patterns that concerned me. After the Wyoming environmental investigation last year, I started documenting more systematically." Patricia nodded, her expression carefully neutral. "The Wyoming situation had been particularly problematic. A Sullivan mining subsidiary had faced significant penalties for water contamination violations. The public story was that rogue site managers had ignored company protocols, but I had evidence suggesting Thomas Sullivan had personally approved cost-cutting measures that led directly to the violations. "The special committee will convene tomorrow morning," Patricia informed me. "Diane Levinson has been appointed chair, with Eleanor Hayes, James Chen, and Miguel Reyes as members. A strong committee, all independent directors with relevant expertise. Thomas couldn't have been pleased with that lineup. They'll want to interview you first," she continued. "Given the personal elements intertwined with the corporate governance issues, they're particularly interested in establishing a clear timeline." I nodded. "I'll be ready." After Patricia left with the secured documents, I sat alone in my office watching. The afternoon shadows lengthened. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Parking garage, level 3, 10 minutes, come alone. Alex Sullivan, Nathan's younger brother." We had never been close. While Nathan had at least attempted to balance family loyalty with his relationship with me, Alex had always been Thomas's perfect soldier, executing his father's will without question or hesitation. What could he possibly want now? Curiosity won out over caution. I took the elevator down to the parking garage, alert for any sign of trouble. The concrete structure was quiet at this hour, most employees still at their desks. My footsteps echoed as I walked toward level 3. Alex was leaning against his Tesla, arms crossed, expression inscrutable. At 32, he was the image of Thomas in his younger days: sharp features, penetrating gaze, the confident bearing of someone who had never doubted his place in the world. "Rebecca," he greeted me without warmth. "Thanks for coming." "What do you want, Alex?" He straightened, glancing around to ensure we were alone. "To give you a warning." As a professional courtesy, I raised an eyebrow. "Professional courtesy? That's a first from the Sullivan family." "Believe it or not, I respected your work before all this," he said, surprising me. "Your restructuring of the European division last year was brilliant. That's why I'm here. I'm listening. Dad is pulling out all the stops on this one. The special committee, the document escrow. You've pushed him into a corner, and Thomas Sullivan doesn't respond well to that. If he's concerned about the investigation, perhaps he should have thought about that before engaging in questionable business practices," I replied evenly. Alex shook his head. "This isn't about business practices anymore. This is about the Sullivan legacy. Dad built Vertex from nothing. It's his life's work. He won't let you destroy that, no matter what it costs." "I'm not trying to destroy anything. I want Vertex to succeed without Sullivan family interference." Same thing, in his mind. Alex pushed away from his car, stepping closer. "He's already spoken to 3 major clients about taking their business elsewhere if the leadership changes. He's activated his network to start questioning your qualifications publicly, And he's hired a private investigator to dig into your past. The last one gave me pause, not because I had anything to hide, but because it demonstrated how personal this fight had become. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, genuinely curious. "You've always been your father's most loyal supporter." Something flickered across Alex's face, a complexity I hadn't previously associated with Nathan's seemingly one-dimensional brother. "Because I'm tired," he said finally. "I'm tired of the tests, the loyalty demands, the family above all mentality. What they did to you at the cabin. I told them it was wrong, that it crossed a line." This revelation stunned me. Alex Sullivan, objecting to a Sullivan family tradition? "Dad didn't listen, of course," he continued. "He never does when he's convinced he's right. But I wanted you to know, not all of us agreed with it." I studied him, trying to determine if this was yet another Sullivan manipulation tactic. "So, what exactly are you suggesting?" "That you consider a compromise, one that lets Dad save face while still implementing some of your reforms. If you push for total victory, he'll burn Vertex to the ground before giving up control." "That's not governance, Alex. That's extortion," he shrugged. "That's family business, Sullivan style. I've watched Dad destroy competitors, partners, even friends who challenged him. He'll do the same to you without hesitation." "Including destroying his son's marriage?" I asked pointedly. Alex's expression softened slightly. "Nathan is devastated, Rebecca. Not just about the marriage, but about his role in all this. He never thought you wouldn't make it back for the meeting. Dad convinced him it was just another family tradition, a rite of passage you needed to experience. And that makes it acceptable? Leaving me stranded in the mountains?" "Of course not," Alex said, surprising me again. "It was cruel and unnecessary, but Nathan has spent his entire life trying to meet impossible standards. We both have. It makes you compliant in ways you don't even recognize until it's too late." For the first time, I glimpsed the weight that the Sullivan brothers carried. The expectation of perfection, the demand for absolute loyalty, the carefully constructed world where family came before all else, including personal integrity. "I appreciate the warning," I said finally, "but I can't back down now. Not when I have the chance to create real change at Vertex." Alex nodded, as if he'd expected this answer. "Then prepare for war, Rebecca, because Thomas Sullivan doesn't lose gracefully." As he turned to leave, I called after him. "Alex, why the change of heart? You've always been the perfect Sullivan son." He paused, looking back with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Maybe I'm tired of perfection. Or maybe seeing what happened to you made me realize that someday I could be the one who fails the test." After Alex left, I remained in the parking garage, processing our conversation. The Sullivan family dynamics were even more complex than I'd realized. What I had interpreted as a unified family front against the outsider actually contained fractures and doubts, potential leverage in the battle ahead. My phone buzzed again, a message from Diane Levinson confirming the special committee, meeting for 9 a.m. tomorrow. The investigation was proceeding, regardless of Thomas Sullivan's behind-the-scenes maneuvering. As I returned to my office, I thought about Alex's warning. Thomas Sullivan was undoubtedly mobilizing every resource at his disposal to combat the threat I represented. The question was whether his decades of influence and connection would outweigh the documented evidence of corporate governance failures. 1. Thing was certain. The next 24 hours would determine not just my future at Vertex, but the company's direction for years to come. That evening, I returned to a boutique hotel in downtown Denver rather than the apartment I had shared with Nathan. I had checked in the previous night after leaving Vertex, creating a neutral space where I could think clearly, away from the emotional complications of our shared home. As I ordered room service and prepared for the next day's special committee meeting, My phone rang with a call from a number I hadn't seen in years. Claire Morgan, my mother. Rebecca? Her voice was hesitant, concerned. Are you all right? Mom? Why are you calling? We spoke occasionally on holidays and birthdays, but unexpected calls weren't part of our strained relationship pattern. I got the strangest call today from someone claiming to be a journalist, she explained. Asking questions about your childhood, your father, our financial troubles after he left. It felt invasive. Thomas Sullivan had wasted no time. Less than 10 hours after our confrontation, he had investigators digging into my past, looking for leverage. Mom, I'm so sorry, I said, genuine regret washing over me. My mother had worked incredibly hard after my father abandoned us, sacrificing everything to keep us afloat. She didn't deserve to be dragged into this corporate battle. What's going on, Rebecca? The man mentioned Vertex Technologies and the Sullivan family. He implied there were concerns about your stability and background. My grip tightened on the phone. It's complicated, Mom. I'm in the middle of a corporate governance dispute with my husband's family. They're trying to undermine me by investigating my past. Your past? She sounded confused. What could possibly be in your past that would concern them? You worked your way through college, built a successful career. If anything, they should be impressed. I smiled despite everything. My mother had never fully understood my professional world, but she had always believed in my capabilities. They're looking for vulnerabilities, I explained. Anything they can use to discredit me professionally. Did you tell this so-called journalist anything? Of course not, she replied, sounding mildly offended. I told him your personal history wasn't up for public discussion, and that if he had legitimate business questions, he should contact you directly. Relief washed over me. Thank you, Mom. That was exactly right. Rebecca, she hesitated. Does this have something to do with Nathan? Are you two having problems? The question caught me off guard. My mother had always liked Nathan, had been thrilled when I married into the prominent Sullivan family. She had even framed the society page announcement of our engagement, proud that her daughter had made it in a way she never could. Yes, I admitted. His family, they did something unforgivable, and Nathan went along with it. I'm not sure our marriage can recover. I gave her the abbreviated version of the cabin incident, leaving out the corporate governance issues, but explaining how the Sullivans had deliberately stranded me as a test of family loyalty. She trailed off, clearly searching for words. That's not a family tradition, Rebecca. That's abuse. Her unequivocal condemnation caught me by surprise. My mother had always been somewhat deferential toward wealth and status, impressed by the Sullivan family's position in society. You deserve better, she continued firmly. I know I wasn't always the most supportive mother. I was working so much, just trying to keep us going after your father left. But I never, ever would have abandoned you somewhere to test you. That's not love, Rebecca. That's control. Her words resonated deeply, validating the anger and hurt I'd been carrying since the incident. Thanks, Mom. That means a lot. Do you need anything? I could come to Denver. I'll be okay, I assured her, touched by the offer. But if anyone else contacts you about me, please let me know immediately. After hanging up, I sat on the edge of the hotel bed, unexpectedly emotional. My mother and I had a complicated relationship, but her instinctive defense of me against the Sullivans' tactics had touched something deep inside. It was a reminder that real family supports you, not tests you through cruelty. My laptop chimed with an incoming email, the formal schedule for tomorrow's special committee meeting. I was slated as the first witness, followed by Marcus, then several other executives. Thomas Sullivan himself was scheduled for the afternoon session. As I reviewed my notes one final time, there was a knock at my hotel room door. Cautious after everything that had happened, I checked the peephole. Nathan stood in the hallway, looking haggard and uncertain. My first instinct was to ignore him, but after a moment's consideration, I opened the door. We would have to talk eventually. Might as well be now before the special committee formalized the investigation. "How did you find me?" I asked, not inviting him in. "I called 12 hotels before I found one where you'd registered," he admitted. "Can I come in? Please?" I stepped aside reluctantly, keeping the door open. Nathan entered, then stopped awkwardly in the center of the room, as if unsure of his welcome. A far cry from his usual confident demeanor. "I spoke with Alex. He began. He told me about your conversation. Your brother surprised me," I said neutrally. "I didn't expect warnings or admissions of doubt from Sullivan." Nathan winced. "We're not a monolith, Rebecca. We don't all think and act the same way." "Really? Because from where I'm standing, you all seemed pretty unified in the abandon Rebecca at the cabin plan." "I made a terrible mistake," he said, meeting my eyes directly. "I know that now. I let my father's influence override my responsibility to you as my husband. There's no excuse for that." His admission was unexpected. Nathan typically defended Sullivan family decisions reflexively, finding ways to justify even their most questionable actions. "Why are you here, Nathan?" "The special committee meets tomorrow. Any conversation between us could be seen as an attempt to influence the investigation." "I'm not here about the investigation," he said quietly. "I'm here about us, about whether there's anything left to save." The question hung in the air between us, weighted with 8 years of history. Some of it wonderful, some of it marred by the Sullivan family's constant presence in our relationship. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "When you drove away, from that cabin, something broke for me. Not just trust, but the entire foundation of what I thought our marriage was built on." "I understand that," he said, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "But is it beyond repair? Because I'm willing to do whatever it takes, Rebecca, even if that means standing against my family." I studied him, looking for signs of the manipulation tactics the Sullivans excelled at. Instead, I saw genuine distress, regret, and something I hadn't seen in Nathan for years. Clarity. "Your father has investigators digging into my past," I told him. "They called my mother today. That doesn't suggest a family ready to accept my continued presence." Nathan's expression hardened. "I didn't know about that. That crosses a line." "One of many lines crossed recently," I pointed out. "The question is, where do your lines lie, Nathan? At what point do you stop being a Sullivan soldier and start being your own man?" He moved toward the window, looking out at the Denver skyline. "I've been asking myself that same question for the past 48 hours, ever since I watched you step off that helicopter." I remembered the moment, emerging from Jake Phillips' helicopter onto the Vertex roof, still wearing yesterday's clothes, but filled with determination. The helicopter was quite the entrance, I acknowledged. "It wasn't the entrance that got to me," Nathan said, turning back to face me. "It was the realization that you'd found a way back despite everything, that you were stronger and more resourceful than any of us had given you credit for, and that I'd been on the wrong side of the test." For the first time since the cabin incident, I felt a flicker of connection with the man I had married, the Nathan who had once valued my strength rather than seeing it as a threat to Sullivan family control. "The special committee will proceed, regardless of our personal situation," I said, maintaining professional boundaries despite the emotional undercurrent. "The governance issues at Vertex are real and need to be addressed." "I know," he said, surprising me again. "And they should be addressed. Vertex deserves better leadership than it's had. My father's time has passed, but he can't see that." He moved toward the door, recognizing that this conversation wouldn't resolve everything in one night. "I'll be at the committee meeting tomorrow. Not to interfere, but to make sure my father understands that his usual tactics won't work this time. As he reached for the doorknob, he paused. Whatever happens with Vertex, with the investigation, I want you to know that I love you, Rebecca. I've been a terrible husband, but I never stopped loving you. After he left, I sat on the edge of the bed, emotions churning. Nathan's visit had complicated an already complex situation. Was his apparent awakening genuine, or another Sullivan strategy to neutralize the threat I posed? Tomorrow would test not just Vertex's governance, but Nathan's newfound independence from the Sullivan family machine. And while I couldn't afford to base business decisions on personal feelings, I couldn't entirely ignore the fragile hope that had sparked during our conversation. The battle ahead would determine Vertex's future, but it would also determine whether Nathan Sullivan was capable of becoming his own man, and whether our marriage had any chance of survival. The morning of the special committee meeting dawned clear and bright, the Colorado mountains crisp against the blue sky. I arrived at Vertex headquarters early, centered and prepared after a fitful night's sleep. Whatever happened today would set the course for my professional future and Vertex's governance structure for years to come. The 14th floor conference room reserved for the committee proceedings was smaller than the main boardroom, more intimate, with a round table that eliminated power positioning. Diane Levinson had clearly chosen the setting deliberately, creating an environment that emphasized fact-finding over hierarchy. "Rebecca," she greeted me as I entered, the other committee members already seated with legal pads and tablets before them. "Thank you for coming in early. We wanted to speak with you informally before the recorded session begins." I nodded, taking the offered seat. Besides Diane, Eleanor Hayes, James Chen, and Miguel Reyes formed the special committee, all experienced independent directors with reputations for integrity. "We've conducted a preliminary review of the documents you provided," James said, his expression serious. "The evidence of governance failures is substantial." Eleanor nodded in agreement. "Particularly concerning are the Wyoming environmental violations and the related party transactions with Sullivan family entities that weren't properly disclosed to the full board. We want to be transparent about our process," Diane explained. "Today's sessions will be fact-finding only. We'll hear from you, Marcus, Thomas, and several other executives. After compiling all testimony, we'll deliberate and present recommendations to the full board next week. And those recommendations could include—" I left the question hanging. "Everything is on the table," Miguel said firmly. "Leadership changes, governance reforms, even regulatory referrals if warranted by the evidence." The gravity of the situation settled over the room. This wasn't just about my position or even Thomas Sullivan's influence. It could potentially involve external investigations if the committee found evidence of serious legal violations. "There's one more thing you should know," Diane added, glancing at her colleagues. "Thomas Sullivan has requested that his son Nathan be permitted to attend all sessions, including yours." My pulse quickened. "As a witness?" "As an observer," Diane, I clarified. "We haven't granted the request yet. Given your personal relationship and the unusual circumstances that triggered these events, we wanted your input before deciding." The committee was giving me unusual deference, a sign they were taking the Sullivan family dynamics seriously as a factor in the governance issues. "Have no objection to Nathan's presence," I said after consideration. "But I would request that he be present for all testimony, including his father's, not selectively." Diane nodded approvingly. That was our thinking as well. Transparency applies to everyone or no one. The formal proceedings began 30 minutes later. A court reporter had been brought in to transcribe the testimony, and Patricia Winters represented Vertex's legal department. Nathan sat quietly in a chair against the wall, his expression unreadable as I took my seat at the table. For the next 3 hours, I methodically presented the governance concerns I had documented over the years. The committee asked pointed, detailed questions, not hostile. but thoroughly testing each assertion against the evidence. I could feel Nathan's gaze on me throughout, particularly when I described the cabin incident and how it connected to broader patterns of Sullivan family interference. "To be clear," Eleanor said at one point, "you're stating that Thomas Sullivan deliberately attempted to prevent your attendance at a critical board meeting by stranding you without transportation at a remote location?" "Yes," I confirmed. "And, furthermore, I arranged with CEO Marcus Reynolds to excuse my absence without my knowledge or consent." "And this was characterized to you as a family tradition? A test of some kind?" James asked, making notes. "That's correct. According to both Nathan and Thomas Sullivan, this type of test is standard practice within the family to assess loyalty and resourcefulness." The committee members exchanged glances that spoke volumes about their assessment of such traditions. When my testimony concluded, Diane called a brief recess before Marcus Reynolds would appear. As the committee members filed out, Nathan approached me. "That was thorough," he said quietly. "It had to be," I replied, gathering my materials. "The issues are too important for anything less." "I know." He hesitated, then added, "My father is furious that I'm here. He called this morning to demand I stand with the family, present a unified front. And yet you came anyway," I observed. "I meant what I said last night," Nathan responded. "Something changed for me when I saw you step off that helicopter. I realized I'd spent my entire life trying to pass my father's tests while forgetting to ask whether those tests were worth passing." Before I could respond, the door opened and Marcus Reynolds entered, his typically confident demeanor noticeably subdued. Nathan and I separated, taking our respective positions for the next session. Throughout the day, the committee heard from multiple witnesses. Marcus appeared defensive, especially when questioned about his cooperation in excusing my absence. Several executives provided testimony that corroborated specific instances of Sullivan family interference I had documented. The atmosphere changed palpably when Thomas Sullivan entered for the final session of the day. Despite being technically retired from operational roles, he carried himself with the authority of someone who still considered Vertex his personal domain. His cold glare at Nathan spoke volumes about his feelings regarding his son's presence. Thomas's testimony was a masterclass in corporate maneuvering, acknowledging just enough to appear forthcoming while reframing decisions in the most favorable light possible. Yes, he maintained influence at Vertex post-retirement, but only out of concern for the company's adherence to founding principles. Yes, certain environmental compliance issues had occurred, but they were the result of rogue employees, not systemic failures. When questioned directly about the cabin incident, Thomas was unapologetic. "The Sullivan family has maintained its success across generations through certain traditions that test character," he stated firmly. "Rebecca married into our family, accepting its values and practices. What she characterizes as abandonment was simply a long-established rite of passage that every family member undergoes." "Including your own children?" Eleanor asked. "Of course," Thomas confirmed without hesitation. "Both Nathan and Alex experienced similar tests when they came of age. It builds the resilience and resourcefulness required for business leadership. And, in Ms. Morgan's case, this test happened to coincide with her first major presentation as COO," James observed. "Was that timing deliberate?" Thomas's smile was cold. "The timing of tests is part of their effectiveness. Real business challenges don't arrive when convenient." Throughout his father's testimony, Nathan remained silent but attentive, his expression tightening at certain points. When Thomas finished and the committee adjourned for deliberation, Nathan and I found ourselves alone in the hallway outside the conference room. "He really believes it," Nathan said quietly. "All of it. The tests, the family loyalty, the right to control everything and everyone around him. He doesn't see anything wrong with what he did to you." "I know," I replied. "That's what makes him dangerous. He's absolutely convinced of his own righteousness." Nathan's phone buzzed with a text. He checked it, then looked up with an expression of disbelief. It's Alex. He says Dad's called an emergency Sullivan family meeting tonight. Apparently, there's a strategic response plan to neutralize the committee's investigation. Are you going? I asked, watching his face carefully. He hesitated only briefly before responding. Yes, but not for the reason my father thinks. 3 days later, the Denver business community was rocked by a series of revelations that transformed Vertex Technologies forever. The special committee, moving with unprecedented speed, presented its findings to an emergency full board meeting. Their conclusions were damning: systematic governance failures, improper related party transactions, and a corporate culture that prioritized Sullivan family interests over shareholder value. Their recommendations were equally decisive. Marcus Reynolds would step down as CEO. The board would be restructured with a majority of truly independent directors, and a comprehensive ethics review would be implemented across all operations. Most shocking to outside observers was Thomas Sullivan's response. Instead of fighting the changes, he announced his complete retirement from all involvement with Vertex, selling the majority of his family's shares in a block transaction to a respected investment group known for supporting ethical corporate governance. What the public didn't know was what had transpired at the Sullivan family meeting 3 nights earlier. According to Nathan, who recounted it to me afterward, Thomas had presented a plan to undermine the committee's investigation through a combination of legal maneuvers, press manipulation, and pressure on individual directors. What Thomas hadn't expected was the unified opposition of his sons. Nathan and Alex, for the first time in their lives, had stood together against their father's tactics, making it clear that they would not participate in any attempt to obstruct the committee's work. More critically, they had come prepared with documentation of their own, additional evidence of questionable decisions that even I hadn't been aware of. Faced with the collapse of the family unity he had enforced through decades of tests and manipulation, Thomas had made a cold calculation. Rather than risk a public governance battle he might lose, with potential regulatory implications, he would divest from Vertex and focus on preserving the remaining Sullivan family assets. 1 month after the helicopter picked me up from that mountain cabin, I stood in my office at Vertex, now serving as interim CEO while the board conducted a thorough search for permanent leadership. The view of the mountains from my window held new significance, a reminder of how quickly fortunes could change, how patterns of control could be broken with sufficient courage and evidence. A knock at my door interrupted my reflection. Nathan stood there, holding a small box. "Do you have a minute?" he asked. Our relationship remained complicated. We were separated but communicating, both recognizing that rebuilding trust would take time if it was possible at all. Nathan had moved into his own apartment, begun therapy to address the impact of his upbringing, and was working with the new Vertex leadership to dismantle the remaining structures of Sullivan family influence. "Of course," I said, gesturing him in. He placed the box on my desk and opened it. Inside was a key. Old, brass, clearly significant. "What's this?" I asked. "The key to the Sullivan cabin," he explained. "I bought it from my father. It's the one asset from the family holdings I wanted to keep." I looked at him questioningly. "Not because of family traditions or nostalgia," he clarified, "but because that place represents both the worst and best decisions of my life. The worst was driving away and leaving you there. The best was realizing afterward that I needed to become someone different than who my father raised me to be." He closed the box and pushed it toward me. "I'd like you to have it. Use it, sell it, burn it to the ground, whatever feels right to you. But I wanted you to know that the place that was meant to break you is now yours to decide its fate." Gesture was powerfully symbolic. Nathan transferring control of the very location where the Sullivan family had tried to demonstrate their control over me. "Thank you," I said, genuinely moved by the meaning behind the gift. "I'll need to think about what to do with it." Take all the time you need, he replied. That's the one thing I've learned through all this. Real strength isn't found in tests or trials. It's found in the freedom to make your own choices on your own timeline. As Nathan left, I picked up the key, feeling its weight in my palm. Just 3 months ago, I had been Rebecca Morgan Sullivan, trying desperately to fit into a family that would never truly accept me. Now I was simply Rebecca Morgan again, stronger, clearer, and in control of my own story. The cabin key represented a fitting conclusion to the Sullivan family chapter of my life. They had abandoned me in the mountains, thinking it would teach me my place in their hierarchy. Instead, it had freed me to rise higher than they had ever intended, with a helicopter arrival they never saw coming. Sometimes, life's most powerful lessons come from its cruelest moments. And sometimes, when people try to break you, they only succeed in breaking the chains that have been holding you back all along. The conference room falls silent as I finish my presentation. 20 executive women from across the country sit around the polished table, their expressions ranging from astonishment to admiration to thoughtful consideration. That's extraordinary, says Vanessa Chen, CEO of a rising biotech firm. When you invited us to this leadership summit, I expected typical corporate strategies, not a personal story of that magnitude. I smile, taking a sip of water. The personal and professional are rarely as separate as we pretend they are, especially for women in leadership positions. It's been 18 months since the helicopter landed on Vertex's roof. 18 months of transformation. For the company, for me, and for how I understand power and resilience. What happened to Thomas Sullivan? Asks Layla Washington, AR venture capitalist whose firm specializes in female-founded startups. He relocated to his estate in Palm Beach, I replied. Officially retired, though I hear he still maintains influence in certain private investment circles. The Sullivan family name doesn't carry the weight it once did in Colorado business. But old connections die hard. I don't add what Mira told me last month, that Thomas had been diagnosed with early-stage Parkinson's disease, a cruel blow to a man whose identity was built on projecting strength and control. Some information isn't mine to share, even about a man who tried to destroy me. And your ex-husband? Another woman inquires cautiously. Nathan is doing well, I say, surprising myself with the genuine warmth in my voice. He's running a foundation, focused on corporate ethics now, a complete departure from his former path. We finalized our divorce a year ago, but we've maintained a respectful relationship. What I don't share is the coffee we had last week, where Nathan seemed more like the man I first fell in love with than the Sullivan soldier he had become. Without the weight of his father's expectations, he was rediscovering himself, finding purpose in helping organizations build ethical leadership cultures. The irony wasn't lost on either of us, that his most valuable work would come from understanding and dismantling the very power structures his family had perfected. Let's take a break, I suggest, noting the time. When we return, I want to discuss how to recognize and respond to control mechanisms in corporate environments, both the obvious and the subtle. As the women file out for refreshments, I remain seated, organizing my notes for the next session. This summit, bringing together female executives to discuss authentic leadership and power dynamics, is the most rewarding aspect of my post-Vertex work. After serving as interim CEO for 6 months, helping to stabilize the company and implement the governance reforms, I had stepped aside for Vertex's new permanent leadership, a highly qualified executive from outside the Sullivan orbit. I remained on the board but declined the chairperson position I was offered, preferring to focus on my newest venture. Morgan Strategies had begun as a small consulting practice focused on corporate governance and ethics. Within a year, it had grown into a respected firm with clients ranging from startups to Fortune 500 companies, seeking to build more transparent, ethical leadership structures. The cabin looks amazing, says a familiar voice interrupting my thoughts. I look up to see Mira approaching, tablet in hand. She joined Morgan Strategies 6 months after its founding, bringing her product development expertise and becoming my most trusted advisor. "You saw the photos?" I ask. She turns the tablet toward me, displaying images of the transformed Sullivan cabin. After holding on to the key for nearly a year, uncertain what to do with the property, I had finally made my decision: not to sell, it or abandon it, but to repurpose it. The renovated cabin now serves as a leadership retreat center where professional women can gather for workshops on resilience, strategic thinking, and authentic power. The location that was meant to break me had been transformed into a place where others could build their strength. "The first retreat is fully booked," Mira informs me, scrolling through reservation details. 25 participants, including 3 executives from companies with notorious boys' club cultures. I smile at the symmetry. Perfect. As participants return for the second half of today's summit, I stand at the head of the table, studying the faces before me. These women lead companies, direct capital, shape industries, yet each has fought battles similar to mine, navigating expectations and assumptions about what leadership should look like. "Before we continue," I say once everyone is seated, "I want to clarify something about the story I shared this morning. It might seem like a tale of corporate warfare, of winning against a powerful opponent, but that's not the lesson I want you to take from it." The room quiets, attention focused. The helicopter moment, dramatic as it was, wasn't actually the most important part of my journey, I continued. The true victory wasn't in defeating Thomas Sullivan, or even in reforming Vertex. It was in recognizing that I had been complicit in my own diminishment, trying to earn acceptance in a system designed to ensure I would always fall short. Nods of recognition ripple around the table. Every woman here understands something about contorting oneself to fit into spaces not designed for them. The tests we face as leaders aren't always as dramatic as being abandoned in the mountains, I acknowledge. Sometimes they're as subtle as being interrupted in meetings, or having ideas attributed to male colleagues, or being labeled aggressive for behaviors that would be called assertive in men. Layla Washington leans forward. "How do you advise women to respond to those subtle tests? The everyday ones that chip away at confidence over time?" "By recognizing them for what they are," I reply. "Control mechanisms aren't about your capability. They're about maintaining existing power structures. Once you understand that, you can choose your response from a position of strength rather than insecurity." The discussion flows from there. Passionate, insightful exchanges about leadership, authenticity, and the courage to stand one's ground. As facilitator, I guide rather than dominate, drawing out diverse perspectives from around the table. 3 hours later, as the summit concludes, several participants linger to speak with me privately. One approaches last, Jessica Torres, a rising executive at a company known for its traditional male-dominated culture. "Your story about the cabin really hit home," she confides. "I've been facing my own version of that. Not as dramatic, but similar dynamics. My boss has been testing me in ways he doesn't test my male colleagues." I nod, unsurprised. The details change, but the patterns persist across industries and organizations. I've been trying to prove myself, working twice as hard, accepting the tests as necessary, she continues. But listening to you today made me realize I'm playing a game designed for me to lose. "And now?" I ask. A slow smile spreads across her face. "Now I'm going to change the game, starting with documenting the differential treatment and presenting it to our CHRO. That takes courage," I acknowledge. "Less than being left in the mountains," she says with a wry smile. "Different kinds of courage, not more or less," I correct her. "The mountain was a single moment of crisis. What you're describing requires sustained bravery over time." After Jessica leaves, I gather my materials and head to the elevator. My phone buzzes with a text from Alex Sullivan, a rare but not unprecedented communication. Since the Vertex transformation, we've maintained occasional contact, united by our complicated relationships with the Sullivan legacy. Dad asking about you at family dinner. Told him you turned the cabin into a women's leadership center. His face was priceless. Thought you'd appreciate that. I smile, appreciating both. The update, and Alex's continued evolution away from his father's influence. Neither Sullivan brother had fully escaped the impact of their upbringing, but both were forging new paths. Alex within the remaining family businesses, but with a markedly different leadership style. Nathan in his corporate ethics work. As I exit the building into the bright Colorado afternoon, I take a moment to appreciate the view of the mountains. The same mountains that frame the cabin, now transformed from a site of abandonment to a place of empowerment. The helicopter that picked me up that morning 18 months ago had been just a vehicle, a means of physical transportation. The true journey had been internal, from seeking approval to standing in my own authority, from trying to belong in someone else's system to creating spaces where others could authentically lead. The greatest revenge against those who try to diminish you isn't fighting them on their terms. It's thriving on your own terms, creating something stronger and more meaningful than what they tried to take from you. Thomas Sullivan had intended the cabin as my breaking point. Instead, it had become my turning point, and now a turning point for others as well. Sometimes the most powerful statement isn't dramatic at all. Sometimes it's as simple as taking the key to a place meant to imprison you and using it to unlock doors for others instead. The helicopter descends toward the clearing beside the Sullivan cabin, now the Morgan Leadership Retreat, stirring the pine needles below in swirling patterns. I watch through the window as the familiar structure comes into view, its exterior now warmer and more welcoming after the renovations, large windows reflecting the surrounding mountains. 2 years to the day since the Sullivans abandoned me here, I've chosen to arrive the same way I departed, by air, a symbolic reclaiming of the narrative. Jake Phillips, who flew me off this mountain that fateful morning, grins as he navigates the landing. Quite the full circle moment, huh, Rebecca? Exactly as intended, I reply, gathering my bag as the helicopter settles onto the newly constructed landing pad. Mira waits on the edge of the clearing, clipboard in hand, supervising the final preparations for tomorrow's inaugural leadership retreat. 20 women executives will arrive for a 3-day intensive program focused on authentic leadership and strategic resilience. Everything's ready, she reports as I approach. Sleeping quarters set up, workshop materials distributed, local chef prepping the welcome dinner. I nod, taking in the transformed property. The wraparound porch where I had paced in panic now features comfortable seating arrangements designed for conversation and connection. Inside, the grand living room has been converted into a seminar space, the Sullivan family hunting trophies replaced by inspiring artwork created by female artists from across the country. Any word from the press? I ask, following Mira inside. 3 requests for interviews after the retreat concludes. Forbes wants to feature the center in their women's leadership issue next month. The media interest doesn't surprise me. The story? Of a woman abandoned by her powerful in-laws, only to rise and create something meaningful from the very location of her abandonment, makes for compelling coverage. While I've kept the personal details of my separation from the Sullivans private, the professional aftermath has become a case study in corporate governance reform. There's something else, Mira says, handing me an envelope. This arrived by courier this morning. The Sullivan family crest is embossed on the thick cream paper. I open it carefully, expecting perhaps a legal notice or some final communication from Thomas. Instead, I find a bank statement showing a substantial donation to the Morgan Leadership Retreat and a handwritten note on Elaine Sullivan's personal stationery. Some traditions deserve to end, others deserve to begin. May this place become everything the Sullivan cabin never was. No signature, just an elegant E at the bottom. Is this some kind of peace offering? Mira asks, peering over my shoulder. More like acknowledgement. I reply, folding the note carefully. Elaine always understood more than she let on. After Vertex's transformation and my divorce from Nathan, I'd had little contact with the elder Sullivans. Thomas had retreated to Florida. His declining health kept quiet from all but family insiders. Elaine had maintained her social presence in Denver, but with a subtly different approach, supporting several women's professional organizations and distancing herself from the more brutal aspects of the Sullivan legacy. Will you accept it? Mira gestures to the donation statement. I consider this as we walk through the cabin, inspecting the sleeping quarters and workshop spaces. The funds would allow us to offer scholarships to promising women leaders from underrepresented backgrounds, exactly the type of initiative the retreat was designed to support. Yes, I finally decided, with full transparency about its source. The money originated from Sullivan Enterprises, built in part through the work of countless employees who deserved better leadership. It feels right that it should now support developing more ethical leaders. As evening approaches, I excuse myself from the preparations and walk alone to the ridge behind the cabin, the same spot where I had climbed desperately seeking cell service 2 years ago. Now, a peaceful meditation area occupies the clearing, with comfortable benches positioned to take in the spectacular mountain vista. I sit, watching the sunset paint the peaks in gold and pink, reflecting on the journey that began here. The helicopter that rescued me that day had been just the beginning, the first step in a transformation I couldn't have imagined as I paced this property in panic and anger. My phone buzzes with a text from Nathan. Thinking of you today, proud of what you've created from what was meant to break you. Our relationship has evolved into something neither of us could have predicted, not the marriage we once had, but a connection based on mutual respect and shared commitment to breaking dysfunctional patterns. His foundation on corporate ethics frequently collaborates with Morgan Strategies, our professional paths intersecting in meaningful ways despite our personal separation. I type back, the retreat opens tomorrow. 20 leaders who will never need helicopters to rescue them because they'll already know their own power. As darkness falls over the mountains, I return to the cabin. The space that once felt like a prison now pulses with possibility. Tomorrow, women will gather here to share experiences, build strategies, and forge connections that will carry them through their own professional challenges. The Sullivan family had intended this remote location as a test of loyalty and obedience. I've transformed it into a catalyst for authentic leadership and collective strength. Where they sought to instill fear and compliance, I've created a space for courage and community. In the main hall, now set up with dinner tables and workshop materials, I pause to appreciate the final symbolic touch, a large photograph on the central wall capturing the moment Jake's helicopter lifted off from this clearing 2 years ago, mountains in the background, a solitary figure visible through the window, beginning her ascent. Beneath the image, a simple quote, "The moment you were meant to break may become the moment you discover your true strength." That morning, abandoned in the mountains with my career seemingly in jeopardy, I couldn't have imagined standing here now, founder of a successful consultancy, creator of a leadership retreat, architect of my own future. The Sullivans had intended the cabin as my ending. Instead, it had become my beginning. As I stand in the transformed space that once witnessed my lowest moment, I feel not triumph over the Sullivans, but gratitude for the harsh lesson they inadvertently provided. In trying to diminish me, they had instead revealed my true capacity, not just to survive their tests, but to create something meaningful from the experience. The helicopter that carried me off this mountain hadn't just transported me physically back to Denver. It had carried me toward the person I was meant to become. Someone who understood that true strength isn't found in winning family approval or corporate power struggles, but in creating spaces where others can discover their own resilience. Tomorrow, 20 women would arrive here, each carrying their own stories of challenges faced and obstacles overcome. And in this place, Once a symbol of isolation and control, they would find connection and possibility instead. Some legacy trails behind us are like shadows. Other legacy we build deliberately, choice by choice, day by day. The Sullivan legacy of tests and control was fading into history. In its place, something new was taking root. Here in the mountains where it all began, reaching outward to create ripples of change far beyond what either I or the Sullivans could have imagined on that fateful morning 2 years ago. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.